Hey, Beholding Initiative, my name is Rufus, and I am very grateful to be able to share a small devotional with you all today. I also want to thank the team for allowing me to do so. I just want to share very quickly from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. And it goes like this: "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us." I know this is a verse we're all familiar with. What Paul is alluding to here, if we read from the beginning of chapter 4, is the light of Christ, or the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he says this treasure, God has chosen to impart it into you and I, jars of clay, to show that the surpassing power belongs to him. If you read through this letter and even throughout the entire New Testament, we'll see the way that the gospel is described is so incredible. Even in the next chapter, in chapter 5, Paul is talking about this gospel, and he says that one has died for all, therefore all have died, and he died for all, that those who might live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised. Later on in the same chapter, chapter 5, he says, in Christ God was reconciling the world to himself. Later he says, for our sake he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. A few verses before our verse 7, he says, for what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord. And so he's just repeatedly, in so many other verses, expressing how amazing this gospel is, how heavy and how valuable and how precious this gospel that you and I have been fortunate enough to know and believe is. And he calls it this treasure, but in verse 7 he says God takes this treasure, and what does he do? He imparts it into jars of clay, easily broken vessels, weak vessels that God chose to impart his gospel into. And so for the next few minutes, I just want to give us a few reasons as to why God chose to impart his gospel, this light of Jesus Christ, into jars of clay. The first one is to show that our salvation is only possible through him alone. Our justification, our redemption, it is only possible through him alone. It is not by our merit. It is not by our works. In the previous verse, Paul says, for God who said, let light shine out of darkness, has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. So Paul is making a callback here to creation, where God looks at the dark and the empty world and he commands, let there be light. In the same way, God looks at you and I in our emptiness and in our darkness, in our absolute incapability, and he commands, let light shine out of that darkness, and he gives us the light of the knowledge of the glory of Jesus Christ, right? In the first letter to Corinth, Paul says, hey, not many of you were wise or of noble birth or powerful according to the world's standards, but God chose you, right? So he talks about how that was God's intention. God did not look for people who were powerful or strong or, very capable vessels. God chose what is weak and what is easily broken, and he did so to show that we are only saved. Our justification is only possible through him alone, to show that the surpassing power is through him alone. Second thing is to show that our sanctification is through him alone. In the first letter to Corinth, Paul says, and because of him you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption. Look at that. Paul is saying Jesus is not only our righteousness and our redemption, but he's also our sanctification, right? We can't do this on our own. We can't make it on our own. Yes, we're saved, and yes, we're redeemed, we're justified, but every single day we progress towards eternity, we completely rely on Jesus. In the same chapter, in chapter 4 of 2 Corinthians, Paul says, we don't lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. And I know I've wondered this, and maybe you have. After we were born again and justified, why couldn't God just make us whole, right? Why couldn't God just make us strong and capable? These strong gold vessels, right? That we don't have to deal with our flesh. We don't have to deal with the pains and the weakness of this world. But God not only called us and justified us as jars of clay, but he kept us as jars of clay to show us that every single day Every single journey towards eternity is only possible by his power alone. So we rely completely on him every day. The next thing is important to show us that our ministry is through him alone, right? Jesus says, you are the light of the world. And so you and I are not only called to absorb this gospel, but to reflect the gospel of Jesus Christ. In the chapter 5 of 2 Corinthians, Paul says we are ambassadors of Jesus Christ, right? What does that mean? An ambassador does not carry his own message. An ambassador does not carry his own opinion. An ambassador is not trying to convince anybody of what he thinks, but he's simply carrying a message across. And in the same way, we are making an appeal to others, and we are sharing God's gospel, not ours. And later in chapter 4, Paul says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. He is saying that, yes, this ministry is tough. Yes, this ministry is going to beat you down. It's going to wear you down. It's going to discourage you at times. But that's to show you that your ministry, whatever it is God has called you to, in whatever area God has called you to serve, you cannot do it on your own. You need the power of Jesus Christ, and that's why God has called you as a jar of clay. And in all of it, God gets the glory, and we see that over and over again. God does so that at the end, we can look back at how we've been redeemed, we can look back at how we've been sanctified, and we can look back at our ministry, and we can say, all glory belongs to God. So let's be encouraged by that. No matter what we're dealing with, maybe we feel like we're not capable enough, maybe we feel like we're too weak. God has called us as jars of clay, and the great thing about it is that we carry a valuable, heavy treasure within us, and that is the gospel of Jesus Christ. God bless you.